Chapter 1, Rebirth in a New World. Arlen didn't know what to expect as his consciousness faded away. One moment, he had been living his life, minding his own business, an ordinary young man in a world that seemed far too familiar. The next, everything went dark, and his world shifted. He had felt his body dissipate, his very essence scattered like dust on the wind. Yet, somehow, he wasn't afraid. It was as if the world around him had been waiting for this moment, as if he had been chosen for something greater. When he opened his eyes, the first thing that struck him was the overwhelming sense of unfamiliarity. His surroundings were different, strange, a forest teeming with colors and life he had never known. He could feel the earth beneath him, solid but somehow alive. The sky above was a deep shade of purple, and the air smelled of earth and something unidentifiably sweet. His body, too, felt different. His limbs were shorter, smaller, almost insect-like. He quickly took stock of his situation. His senses were heightened, sharper than they had ever been. He could hear the rustling of leaves from miles away, smell the faintest hints of the creatures hiding in the underbrush. And then there was his body. What had once been a human form was now that of a small, impish creature. Horns sprouted from his forehead, and a tail whipped behind him. His skin was covered in a thin layer of reddish scales, and his eyes glowed faintly with a strange golden hue. The transformation was jarring, but it didn't take long for Arlen to realize the truth: he had been reincarnated. But why? And how? As he pondered, a soft, ethereal voice echoed in his mind. "Welcome, Arlen, to the world of Fyra. You have been granted a second chance, but in a different form. Your new existence begins now. The system will guide you on your path." The system? Arlen frowned. He didn't understand, but the voice spoke again, this time with more clarity. "You are now an imp, a low-level monster. You will evolve and grow stronger by gaining experience and completing tasks. Your fate is in your hands. Will you become a hero, a villain, or simply a being who follows its own desires? The choice is yours." A strange tingling sensation washed over him as the voice faded, and in the distance, he spotted a small, weak goblin. A potential source of experience, perhaps? Arlen smiled. He didn't care about being a hero or a villain. He had only one goal now: to explore this world, follow his own desires, and see where it would take him. Chapter 2, The First Encounter. Arlen didn't waste time. With a flick of his tail, he began moving toward the goblin, eager to test his new body's capabilities. As he crept closer, he noticed the goblin was sitting on a rock, sharpening a crude stone knife. It seemed unaware of Arlen's approach. The imp was quick, much faster than the goblin, and his small form made him difficult to spot in the thick foliage. His claws twitched with excitement as he prepared to strike. The goblin would be his first test, and he wasn't going to fail. Just as he leaped from his hiding spot, the goblin looked up, its beady eyes locking onto Arlen's. It screeched, scrambling to its feet, but Arlen was already in motion. He darted forward, his claws aimed for the goblin's throat. The goblin managed to block with its knife, but the imp's strength was unmatched. Arlen's small form was agile, darting left and right, evading every swipe of the goblin's blade. He hissed, showing his sharp teeth as he lashed out with his claws, slashing at the goblin's arm. It yelped in pain, stumbling back. The goblin wasn't done yet, however. It roared in anger, swinging the knife wildly. But Arlen was faster. With a quick motion, he grabbed the goblin's wrist, twisting it until the weapon dropped from its grasp. The goblin struggled, trying to punch Arlen with its free hand, but the imp ducked and weaved, his movements quick and precise. In the end, it wasn't long before the goblin was on the ground, blood pooling around it. Arlen stood over his defeated foe, his chest heaving with excitement. He felt the familiar sensation of experience points flooding his being, and his body buzzed with new energy. He had won. But more importantly, he had tested his abilities. He was an imp, yes, but he could be much more. Chapter 3, A Taste of Power. As Arlen stood over the defeated goblin, he felt a rush of satisfaction. The experience points had begun to accumulate in his mind, and the feeling was intoxicating. This was just the beginning. He had only scratched the surface of what he could do. Arlen took a moment to examine his surroundings. The forest was vast, and the air hummed with an energy that seemed to call to him. He felt connected to this place, as though it were part of him, and part of his new identity. Before he could contemplate his next move, the voice from earlier echoed in his mind once again. Congratulations, Arlen. You have gained your first experience. Your abilities are now at your disposal. You may view your status and adjust your skills at any time. The voice was calm, soothing even. It felt like a guide, a constant presence in his mind. With the thought, Arlen opened his status screen. A window appeared in his vision, displaying the details of his current state. Status screen. Name, Arlen. Race, imp. Level, 1. HP, 50-50. MP, 30-30. Strength, 10. Agility, 15. Endurance, 8. Intelligence, 10. Skills. Minor Illusion, Level 1. Flame, Level 1. Sharp Claws, Level 1. Arlen blinked in surprise. His stats weren't impressive by any means, but they were a start. His agility stood out the most, which made sense given his small, nimble frame. The minor illusion skill was useful, though limited, and Flame, a basic fire spell, would definitely come in handy. With his newfound knowledge, Arlen set off again, determined to explore further. The world was vast, and there was so much to discover. His goal wasn't to conquer it all in one day, but to see where his desires would take him. Would he evolve into a stronger monster? Would he meet new beings, perhaps even other creatures who were also navigating this world? The possibilities were endless. And as Arlen moved deeper into the forest, he couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This world was his playground, and he was going to enjoy every minute of it. Chapter 4: Goblins and the First Fight. The sun was almost at its zenith when Arlen found himself at a crossroads of several winding paths. He paused for a moment, observing the surroundings. The air was heavy, thick with a strange energy he had started to sense around him. He didn't have a specific goal in mind, but each new exploration seemed to bring him closer to a deeper understanding of this world and the mechanisms governing his evolution. After a few hours of walking, he spotted a figure in the distance. A group of goblins, far more numerous than the ones he had encountered the day before. He watched them discreetly from behind a thick bush, hidden in the shadow. They seemed to be chatting, their guttural language resonating in the air. Arlen noticed that they were armed, some with huge wooden clubs, others with rudimentary bows. They seemed better prepared than the goblins he had met before. Arlen rose quietly, thinking that perhaps he could learn something from this encounter. If he let them be, these goblins would eventually discover his presence, and he preferred to be the one controlling the flow of events. With a fluid motion, he activated his minor illusion skill and created a ghostly figure of himself as a distraction. The illusion moved slowly in the opposite direction of his actual position, catching the goblin's attention. The creatures reacted immediately. The largest goblin, a massive scarred beast, barked orders. They all began running toward the illusion, their eyes fixed on the wavering shape of Arlen that seemed to move away. But that was exactly what Arlen had wanted. He waited for the right moment. When the goblins were just a few steps from the illusion, he used his flame skill. A small ball of fire appeared in his hand, which he skillfully threw toward a nearby bush. The explosion of flames drew the group's attention. That was when he dashed out of his hiding place, taking advantage of the confusion. He leapt from the bush, his small legs moving quickly, and pounced on the nearest goblin. The goblin, caught off guard, couldn't react in time. Arlen jumped onto its throat, using his small claws to scratch its rough skin. The goblin growled, tossing Arlen aside with strength that sent him flying several meters. But Arlen wasn't ready to give up. He quickly recovered, eyeing the group now surrounding him. One of the goblins raised a club high into the air, ready to strike. Arlen concentrated, using his enhanced agility to dodge the blow, slipping underneath it just in time. He rolled on the ground, springing back to his feet in a fluid motion, his claws ready to strike. The goblin didn't give him respite and launched a series of brutal blows with its club. Each strike felt like an earthquake, capable of crushing rocks. Arlen focused, dodging narrowly with each attack, his speed being his only advantage against the goblin's raw power. Every time he avoided a strike, the ground cracked beneath the blows, and the goblin's fury grew more apparent. But Arlen had learned to observe and adapt. He let the goblin swing wide and then used his minor illusion to confuse his opponent, creating a copy of himself that moved just beside the club. The goblin, fool, swung at the illusion, striking nothing but air. This was the moment. Arlen leaped backward, then to the side, striking the goblin's knee with a sharp claw. It was a targeted attack, a chance to unbalance the foe. The goblin grunted, staggering from the blow. Arlen took advantage of the opening, striking inside the goblin's armor, aiming to weaken it further. But the goblin wasn't about to give up so easily. It howled in rage, swinging its club wildly. Arlen found himself once again caught in a dance of dodges, pushing his abilities to the limit. Minutes stretched on, and he could feel fatigue creeping in. His small body was quick, sure, but the goblin's strength was formidable. He knew he couldn't afford another mistake. This was a fight to the end, and it would be up to him to decide how it ended. Chapter 5, The confrontation intensifies. The battlefield was silent now, save for the rustling of leaves and the crackling of lingering flames in the air. Arlen stood, watching the remaining goblins. The first had been subdued completely, its muscles paralyzed by the magic of the flames. The second was wounded, its skin marked by scratches and burns. The last one, the leader, was now just a mass of fury. It advanced slowly toward Arlen, eyes blazing with rage. Arlen knew the fight wouldn't end until this goblin was down. He took a stance, taking a deep breath. This time, he wasn't going to settle for just running. He would face this goblin on his terms, test his skills, and make sure he had control of the situation. The goblin roared and lunged, its club ready to bring down on Arlen. The imp darted forward, leaping at the last moment to avoid the fatal blow. He rolled across the ground, quickly getting back to his feet with fluid precision, his claws primed for an attack. The goblin didn't give him any respite and launched a series of heavy blows with its club. Every strike was like thunder, its power threatening to crush Arlen's tiny frame. Arlen concentrated, using his agility to dodge just in time, his speed being his only weapon against the brute force of the goblin. Each time he avoided a strike, the ground cracked beneath the blows, and the goblin's fury grew. But Arlen had learned to read his opponent's movements. He let the goblin swing wildly and then used his minor illusion once again to confuse it, creating a copy of himself. The goblin swung at the illusion, striking only air as Arlen swiftly moved behind him. The imp dashed forward, striking at the goblin's knee with precision. The goblin staggered slightly, and Arlen took the opportunity to strike at its side. The goblin roared in pain and anger, but the imp was relentless. Every attack seemed to be a calculated strike, weakening the beast bit by bit. But Arlen knew the fight was far from over. The goblin was far stronger than the others, and Arlen's endurance was starting to wane. The goblin growled and, with a sudden burst of strength, swung its club in a devastating arc. Arlen was forced to leap back, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. His body felt the strain of the constant movement, but he refused to stop. He could see the goblin weakening, its swings growing more erratic and desperate. In a last-ditch effort, the goblin charged at Arlen, its club raised high. Arlen had no choice but to dive forward, using all his remaining energy to land a vicious blow to the goblin's arm. The attack sent the club flying out of its grip, and the goblin staggered, vulnerable. This was the moment. Arlen leaped up, claws outstretched, and delivered a final blow to the goblin's neck. The creature collapsed with a mighty crash, its body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Arlen stood over it, panting, his heart racing. He had won. He had proven to himself that, despite being just an imp, he could face any challenge. The world was his to conquer,